The sun had been climbing for 2 hours, but in the Arizona Territory around 1883, that was more than enough. The heat was not a gentle thing. It was a physical weight, a solid, shimmering presence that pressed the dust into every crack and hollow. Dry Creek was a town built in a hollow, a shallow basin of alkali soil that trapped the heat and held it long after sunset. The wind, when it moved, did nothing to cool the air. It only lifted the fine, red-brown dust from the single street and swirled it against the unpainted boards of the buildings. The dust coated the sign for the Dandelion Saloon, blurring the yellow flower painted on it. It settled on the empty benches outside the sheriff's office, and it piled in drifts against the locked door of the assay house, far to the north. The Mogollon Rim was a distant, blue-purple promise of mountains and pine trees, an escape that was just as impossible as the moon. Eliza Hart watched the dust. She had been watching it for most of her 21 years. She stood in the parched dirt behind the lean-to she and her father called home, her hands resting on the rough hide of her most patient goat, a gray nanny she called Mercy. The goat chewed mechanically on a piece of dried thistle, its yellow eyes unblinking. Eliza had 3 goats in total. They were her dowry, her inheritance, and her burden, all in one. She pushed a strand of damp, brown hair away from her face, leaving a dusty streak on her forehead. She was dressed in a calico dress so faded that its original pattern was a mystery, the fabric worn thin as a prayer. She was tough, but it was a quiet toughness, the kind born of necessity, not choice. It was the toughness of a weed growing in a crack in the rock. Inside her, there was a fire, but it was banked low, smothered by poverty and the heavy, constant shame of her father. She could hear him, even from here. Josiah Hart was not a quiet drunk. He was in their shack, likely finishing the last of the cornmeal mush from the morning, and washing it down with whatever liquid credit he had managed to beg from the saloon keeper last night. He had been a good man once. Her mother had sworn it. A man who could read poetry and fix a wagon wheel. But the fever that took Eliza's mother 6 years ago had taken Josiah's spine with it. Now he was just a hollow man filled with whiskey and regrets. Eliza sighed, the sound lost in the vast, indifferent silence. She turned her gaze from the town to her small patch of earth. Her goats were survival, but her one small luxury, her one link to the woman her mother had been, was tucked into the pocket of her dress. It was a small, leather-bound Bible, its cover warped by time and heat. She did not read it for sermons. She was literate. Her mother had made sure of that. But she read it for the words themselves, for the rhythm of them. And she kept it for what was pressed inside a flat, gray-green sprig of sage. She would hold it to her nose sometimes, breathing in the clean, sharp scent of the hills, a smell that was the opposite of the sour whiskey and stale sweat that clung to her father. Miles away, on the high basalt ridge that framed the valley, Ashki Knees sat very still on his horse. He was a man of 28, but his face was carved by a stillness that made him seem older. He was Dine, a man of the people. He had come from the high plateaus, a place of canyons and clean wind, and he did not like the clutter of the white man's towns. He saw the world in terms of balance. He lived by Ho-Ho, the walk-in beauty, a harmony that the town of Dry Creek actively disturbed. His eyes, the color of wet obsidian, scanned the valley below. He was a tracker, and he read the land like other men read a book. He saw the heat haze that made the town shimmer. He saw the single struggling cottonwood near the livery, its leaves already yellow in the heart of summer. He saw the faint, desperate trails of small animals leading to dry waterholes. The land was thirsty. The land was suffering. He had been a scout, guiding white men who looked at the land and saw only its dangers, or its worth in dollars. He had guided army inspectors who drew lines on maps, lines that cut through grazing lands and sacred places without a second thought. He had done it for the money, to help his family, but it had left a sour taste in his mouth. He did not scout for them anymore. He shifted his weight in the saddle. His horse, a tough, wiry Mustang the color of sun-baked clay. Flicked its ears but did not move. Ashki's hand rested lightly on the horse's neck. His bridle was not the stamped leather the white men favored. He had woven it himself, a long and patient task. From the black hair of a mare he had loved and lost in a skirmish on the border. The bridle was a memory, a reminder of what happened when harmony was broken by violence. He was a quiet man. He spoke little, and he preferred to act. He had skins to trade, and his family needed flour and salt. He would go into the town, do his business, and leave. He nudged his horse with his knee, and the Mustang began a sure-footed, economical walk down the winding game trail. As he got closer, the sounds of the town reached him, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, a dog barking, the distant, angry shout of a man. He passed the main well as he reached the town's edge. It was the only deep well in the valley, and it was controlled by Silas Bragg. Bragg was a name that carried weight in Dry Creek. He was a rancher who had come in 3 years ago with a lot of money and a hard face. He had bought the best land, the land with the most water, and when the drought began, he had deepened his well and put a fence around it. Now he sold the water, a bucket at a time, for prices that made men curse under their breath. 2 armed men, wearing shirts with Bragg's B brand stitched on the pocket, sat in the shade of a canvas awning by the well, their rifles propped against the fence. Ashki saw a small cluster of Mexican women standing just outside the fence line, their earthenware jugs empty on the ground. They were waiting, hoping the price might drop, or that the guards might be merciful. Ashki knew they would be waiting a long time. He saw Deputy Clayton Pike emerge from the sheriff's office. The building was just a wooden box with a single barred window. Pike was young, with a face that had not yet decided whether to be kind or cruel, but he wore a badge, and the badge belonged to Silas Bragg as much as the well did. Pike walked over to the women, his hand on his pistol. He did not shout. He just jerked his thumb toward the collection of shacks on the other side of the arroyo. "Go home." The women, silent, gathered their jugs and drifted away. Pike watched them go, then spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. He was the law, such as it was. Ashki kept his face impassive. He guided his horse toward the squat adobe building that served as the mercantile. He kept his eyes forward, feeling the weight of the town, the grit in the air, the imbalance of it all. Eliza, having settled her goats, decided to make the walk. She needed thread. It was a small, practical need, but it was enough to pull her from the shade of the rock. She left the goats in the arroyo. They would not wander far from the little patch of shade, and walked along the edge of the street. She kept her head down. She knew her place. She was Josiah Hart's daughter. The men who lounged on the saloon porch watched her pass, their eyes moving over her, but they said nothing. She was too poor to be worth the trouble. She saw Silas Bragg. He was on horseback, a big, powerful man on a big, powerful black horse. His shirt was clean, his hat was new, and his boots were polished. In a town of dust and sweat, he looked impossible. He was talking to Deputy Pike, leaning down from his saddle, his voice a low rumble. Pike was nodding, his face eager and attentive, like a hound waiting for a scrap. Bragg did not even glance at Eliza. She was as invisible to him as the dust mites dancing in the air. She slipped into the mercantile, the small bell over the door announcing her arrival with a cheerful, lying jingle. The store was dark and blessedly cooler than the street. It smelled of coffee beans, new denim, and spiced soap. She was waiting for the proprietor to finish with another customer when she heard the voices. 2 ranchers, lean men with sun-scorched faces, were standing by the pickle barrel. "It is the drought," one said, his voice dry as the land. "It is pushing everyone to the edge. It is Bragg pushing," the other countered. He was quieter, his gaze fixed on the cracker barrel. "He is buying up every horse he can find. Heard he is paying top dollar, too. Building a big herd for a sale up north. A sale to who the army is not buying. Does not matter. He's choking us out. And this talk of Red Jack, it makes me nervous. A herd that big is a temptation. Red Jack is a ghost story, the first man said, though he did not sound convinced. He was real enough for the convoy he hit last spring, and I heard he was seen not 20 miles from the border, looking for recruits. Eliza's stomach, already tight with hunger, clenched with a new, cold fear. Red Jack. The name was a bogeyman in this part of the territory, a leader of a gang of rustlers and cutthroats who roamed the borderlands. If Bragg was building a herd, and Red Jack was in the area, it was a spark falling on dry tinder. The store's bell jingled again. Eliza looked up, her errand forgotten. The Navajo man she had seen earlier had entered. He was tall, leaner than the white men, and he moved with a silence that was startling. He carried a rolled bundle of fox skins, their red fur bright in the gloom. He walked to the counter, unrolled them without a word, and waited. He did not look at her. He did not look at the ranchers. He stood in the center of the room, a point of stillness in the dusty, anxious world of Dry Creek, and he waited. The heat of the day did not die. It only curdled. Night fell on Dry Creek not as a relief, but as a different kind of oppression. The air in the Dandelion Saloon was a thick yellow fog of kerosene smoke, sweat, and cheap whiskey. It was loud with the clack of glasses and the shuffling of worn cards, a desperate, brittle cheerfulness that fooled no one. Josiah Hart sat at a corner table. His shoulders slumped. He was running on whiskey fumes and a line of credit that had, moments ago, snapped shut. His eyes, bloodshot and watery, stared at the 5 cards in his hand. They were worthless. A pair of 3s and nothing else. Across the table, Silas Bragg smiled. It was a thin, dry smile that did not touch his eyes. He was not playing, he was watching. He had been watching Josiah for an hour, feeding him just enough rope in the form of whiskey and small loans to hang himself. Well, Josiah, Bragg's voice was a smooth rumble. Cutting through the saloon's noise, it appears your luck has run dry. Just like the creek outside, a few men at the nearby tables chuckled. Bragg's humor was the only kind that was safe to enjoy. I'm good for it. Silas, Josiah mumbled, his hand trembling as he pushed the useless cards away. Just need a little more time. A little stake. Time is the one thing you have run out of, Bragg said. He pulled a small, black ledger book from his coat pocket and tapped it with a clean finger. You are in my debt for, let's see, $35.50. That is a significant sum for a man of your limited means. $35. It might as well have been 1,000. Josiah's head sank. I will work it off. Silas, I can muck your stalls. You cannot work off that much in a year, Josiah. And frankly, your labor is not worth the whiskey it runs on. Bragg leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. Though everyone in the saloon was now listening, but I am a reasonable man. I am a man who sees value where others do not. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Your daughter, Eliza. She is 21. Is she not? A healthy girl? Josiah's head snapped up, a flicker of something shame, or perhaps just fear in his bleary eyes. Eliza, what does she have to do with this? She is an asset. Josiah, wasted on you, wasted on those goats. I need help up at the ranch. House help. My housekeeper is getting old. A girl like that, she could learn. A simple labor contract. She works for me for, say, 1 year, and this debt is gone. Wiped clean. The saloon had gone quiet. This was something new. This was sport. A labor contract, Josiah repeated, the words slurring. He did not understand. He means indentured, you fool, a voice called from the bar. Not at all, Bragg said smoothly. It is a simple arrangement, legal as the day is long. In fact, he gestured to the back of the room. Deputy Pike is right here. He can witness the paper. Clayton Pike, who had been nursing a beer in the shadows, straightened up, his hand automatically going to his belt. He looked nervous, but his eyes were fixed on Bragg. I cannot do that. Josiah whispered, the first sober words he'd spoken all night. She is my daughter, and you are her father, who cannot feed her, Bragg countered, his voice hardening. The velvet was gone. Now it was iron. You have nothing. Josiah, you are less than nothing. I am offering you a way out. I am offering you a fresh start. Bragg snapped his fingers. One of his ranch hands, a burly man with a flat nose, pushed away from the wall. Go fetch the girl. Tell her her father needs her. No, Josiah said, trying to stand. But his legs were jelly. Oh, yes. Bragg pulled a pre-written form from his ledger. She will sign. Or you will. And if you do not, I will have Pike here arrest you for your debt. You will spend the next 6 months in the Yuma prison. And what do you think happens to your precious Eliza then, alone with those goats? This drought is hard. Josiah, people get desperate. The threat hung in the air, thick and foul as the smoke. Josiah's heart broke. He collapsed back into his chair, his face a mask of greasy sweat and tears. He was a man drowning, and Bragg had just offered him an anchor for a lifeline. When the ranch hand returned, he was pulling Eliza by the arm. She had been woken from a light sleep, dragged from her home without even her shoes. Her feet were bare in the saloon's filth, her thin nightdress her only covering. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. She was terrified, but as her eyes adjusted to the smoky light, they found her father, and the terror hardened into a cold, familiar anger. Father, she said, her voice shaking but clear. What is this? Let go of me. She wrenched her arm free from the ranch hand's grip. Eliza, my girl, Bragg said, standing up. He was a mountain of a man next to her. He smiled, a grotesque twisting of his lips. Your father and I are just concluding a business arrangement, a new life for you. You will be coming to work for me. Eliza looked from Bragg's smiling face to her father's crumpled form, and then to the paper on the table. She could read. She saw the words labor and 1 year and her own name. No, she said, it was not a plea. It was a statement. No, I will not. It is not your choice, girl, Bragg said, his good humor fading. Your father has agreed. It is his right. He has no right. Eliza's voice rose, cutting through the silence. He is drunk. You cannot do this. It is not legal. Oh, but it is, Clayton Pike said, stepping forward. He held an ink stamp in his hand, the official seal of the territory. He looked at Bragg, not at Eliza. A contract signed by a parent for a dependent is binding. It is the law. I am not a dependent. I am 21 years old, she cried, backing away. But the wall of silent, watching men penned her in. You cannot sell me. I am not selling you, girl. I am saving you. And I am even throwing in a sweetener. Bragg nodded to the door. Bring it in. Another ranch hand led a horse into the saloon. It was a magnificent creature, a palomino mare with a coat like spun gold and a white mane. It snorted, its eyes wide with fear at the smoke and the smell of men. She is yours. Josiah, Bragg announced, a gift. For your cooperation, this mare, and your debts wiped clean. All for 1 year of your daughter's time. The absurdity of it, the cruelty, was a physical blow. Eliza stared at the horse, this beautiful animal being traded for her. She felt sick. She looked at the faces in the crowd, men she had known all her life, the blacksmith, the storekeep. They watched, some with pity, some with amusement, but none moved. Sign the paper. Josiah, Bragg commanded. Josiah, his eyes fixed on the golden horse, picked up the pen. Do not, Eliza whispered. Father, please. His hand trembled, spattering ink on the table. He signed his name with a jagged, broken scrawl. Clayton Pike stepped forward, thumped his stamp onto the paper, and it was done. Welcome to my service. Eliza, Bragg said, reaching out to take her arm. Eliza spat in his face. The saloon erupted. Bragg roared, wiping the spittle from his cheek. His hand raised to strike her. The crowd surged, some laughing, some shouting. A person is not cattle. The voice was not loud, but it was clear and cold as spring water. It cut through the noise like a fresh blade. Everyone turned. Ashki stood near the door. He had been there for half an hour, trying to sell a fresh-shot colt and a brace of foxskins to the saloon keeper. He had been a silent witness to the entire ugly transaction. His face was calm, but his eyes were not. They were black fire. He had a small bag of flour and a tin of coffee at his feet. He had his pay, but he had not left. Bragg lowered his hand, his eyes narrowing at the Navajo man. "What did you say?" "Scout, I said," Ashki repeated, his English precise. "A person is not cattle. You cannot trade a horse for her. It is not balance." Bragg laughed. A short, ugly bark. "Balance, I am talking law, boy. This is a legal contract, stamped and sealed. Now you take your flour and get back to your rocks. This is white man's business. I am making it my business," Ashki said. He did not move, but the energy in the room shifted to him. "You want a horse for the paper. You got a horse, but you got the wrong one." "What are you talking about?" Bragg said, confused. "The paper says a horse, not that horse." Ashki nodded at the terrified Palomino. "You take that horse back. I will give you a horse for the paper. Then the paper is finished. She is free." The audacity of the offer silenced the room again. A Navajo, offering a horse. "You," Bragg scoffed. "What kind of broken-down nag do you have to offer? I want the Palomino." "The deal is for the Palomino." "The deal is for a horse," Ashki insisted. "I have a horse. He is outside." He turned to the saloon keeper. "Tell him the horse I came in on." The saloon keeper, a nervous man named Finn, licked his lips. It is a good horse. "Mr. Bragg, a strong horse, a paint, a war pony," he called it. Ashki's gaze did not leave Bragg. "He saved my life. Twice. He is worth more than that paper. He is worth more than that pretty yellow horse. You take my horse. You give me the paper. The debt is paid. She is free." Bragg was trapped. His own legal argument had been turned against him. The contract, as he had so proudly announced, was for a horse. It did not specify which one. To argue now would be to admit his entire scheme was a sham, a personal cruelty rather than a business transaction. And in front of the whole town, his face turned a dark, mottled red. He wanted the girl, not the horse. The horse was just the grease to make the shame slide down easier. But Ashki had offered him a finer animal, and had done so publicly. "Fine," Bragg spat. "A horse for a horse. Take the paint. Give me the paper." Pike, looking pale, handed the newly stamped contract to Bragg, who in turn shoved it at Ashki. "Here is your prize. Scout. I hope she is worth it." Ashki took the paper. He did not look at it. He looked at Eliza. She was shaking, her arms wrapped around herself, her face pale. He walked over to her, stopping a few feet away. He did not touch her. He held out the paper. "This is yours," he said. Eliza stared at the paper, then at his face. He was a stranger, a man with a face she did not know, a man who had just given up a horse that had saved his life for her. Slowly, her hand shaking, she reached out and took the contract. "Tear it," he said, his voice soft. She did. Her fingers fumbled, but then she ripped the paper in half, and then in half again. The sound of the tearing fibers loud in the silent room. She let the pieces fall to the filthy floor. Bragg watched, his face a thundercloud. "You have made a fool of me, Scout. You will regret that." He gestured to his men. "Take the paint horse, and get the Palomino out of my saloon." He stormed out of the Dandelion, his men scrambling after him. The show was over. The crowd began to mutter, breaking apart, the men returning to their drinks, already retelling the story, already turning it into a legend or a joke. Josiah Hart had not moved. He was staring at the pile of torn paper at his daughter's feet. Eliza stood frozen. She was free, but she was barefoot, in her nightdress, in a room full of drunk men, and her father was a broken, useless thing. The man who had freed her was a stranger. Ashki watched her. He saw the fear in her eyes, the shame, and the wild, panicked confusion. He had seen that look in the eyes of a rabbit just before the coyote strikes. He bent down, picked up his bag of flour and his tin of coffee. He slung his rifle over his shoulder. He walked to the door and paused, turning back to her. He did not command her. He did not offer her a home, or protection, or a life. He just stated a fact. "It is not safe for you here," he said. "I have a camp. It is half a night's walk. There is a fire." He said nothing else. He did not offer his hand. He did not call her by her name. He just waited. Eliza looked at her father, who would not meet her eyes. She looked at the men at the bar, who were now watching her with a new, different kind of interest. She was the girl who had been bought by a Navajo. She looked at the torn pieces of paper on the floor. She made her choice. She lifted her chin, walked past her father without a word, and followed Ashki Knees out of the Dandelion Saloon, into the dark, and into the unknown. She was not his property. She was not his wife. She was just, for tonight, safer with him than she was with her own people. The saloon door swung shut behind them, cutting off the yellow light and the sour smell of whiskey. The night air of Dry Creek was cold, a sudden shocking contrast to the heat of the saloon. It was a cold that carried the scent of alkali dust and vast, empty distance. Eliza stood barefoot on the wooden porch, the splinters biting into her soles. She was still in her thin nightdress. She watched him, this stranger, Ashki Knees, as he adjusted the rifle on his shoulder and picked up his small bag of flour. He had lost his horse, a horse that was part of him. For her, a woman he did not know. The weight of that sacrifice settled on her, heavier than Bragg's hand. He did not walk down the main street. He turned aside, moving into the alley between the saloon and the mercantile, his steps making no sound on the hard-packed earth. He did not look back to see if she was following. He assumed she was. He assumed she had made her choice. She had... Eliza took a breath, the cold air burning her lungs, and she stepped off the porch. She followed him into the shadows. They moved through the sleeping town like ghosts. He led her past the silent blacksmith shop, past the dark windows of the sheriff's office, and toward the wide, dry arroyo that cut the town in half. The bed of the creek was soft sand and gravel, a pale, empty road under the moonlight. He stepped down into it, and she followed, the small, sharp stones of the bank cutting her feet. She winced, but made no sound. He walked ahead of her, keeping a distance of perhaps 6 feet. He was a dark shape, tall and lean, moving with an economy of motion she had never seen. He did not stumble. He did not scuff his feet. He moved like a shadow. They walked for what felt like an hour. The only sounds were the crunch of her own small, clumsy steps in the gravel and the distant, lonely cry of a coyote. The town was gone, hidden by a bend in the arroyo. They were alone in a world of pale rock and black sky. Eliza's feet were screaming. She was sure they were bleeding. She was cold, so cold, and the shame of her thin nightdress, of her father's betrayal, of her own helplessness, was a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. She wanted to sit down. She wanted to weep. She did neither. She kept walking, her eyes fixed on the back of the man in front of her. He stopped. She stopped too, nearly tripping, her heart hammering. He did not turn around. He was just standing still, listening. The silence of the desert night poured in. He was listening to things she could not hear. Finally, he turned. In the moonlight, she could see his face clearly for the first time. It was a strong face, all planes and angles, with a wide, firm mouth and eyes that seemed to see everything. He looked at her, and his gaze was not like Bragg's. It was not hungry or cruel. It was assessing. It was like being looked at by a hawk. His gaze dropped. He looked at her bare feet, now dark with dirt, and, she knew, blood. He said nothing. He simply turned and changed his path, moving from the rocky edge of the arroyo to the deep, soft sand in its center. The walking was harder, like slogging through snow, but it was not sharp. He was slowing his pace for her. This small, unspoken kindness broke something in her. The silence, which had been a shield, now felt like a cage. She had to speak. She had to prove she was more than the creature he had rescued. "My mother died," she said. Her voice was a dry croak. He stopped again, turning to face her. He waited. "It was a fever. 6 years ago. I was 15. She liked books. She taught me to read from the Bible, and from a book of poems she had. She said words were the only thing no one could take from you." He nodded, once, encouraging her to go on. "When she was gone, he fell apart. My father, he was a good man before. But he just fell into a bottle and never came out. He sold her books for whiskey, all except the Bible." She was talking to fill the silence, to tell someone, to make the man who had paid such a high price for her understand what he had bought. "I wanted to be a teacher," she whispered, the confession feeling small and foolish under the vast, starry sky. "I wanted to teach the children on the edge of town, the ones whose parents cannot read, to give them words," she finished. And the silence that followed was different. It was not empty. He was truly listening. He looked up at the stars, at the belt of silver dust that spilled across the sky. "I was a scout," he said, his voice quiet, lower than hers. "For the army, for the wagons. I showed them the water holes. I showed them the safe paths through the canyons." He paused, and she could feel the weight of a story he had told to no one, not in a long time. "I had a friend. Hastin, it means man, in my language. We tracked a war party. Red Jack's men, they had stolen horses from the army. We tracked them for 3 days, into the high canyons." He looked down at the sand, his face a mask of old shadows. "It was an ambush. Hastin was on the ridge. I was in the wash. I heard the shot. I saw him fall. I was too late. I carried him back. For 2 days. He was gone." He looked at Eliza, and his eyes were full of a loneliness so deep it made her ache. "I guide the white men across the desert. I show them the water, but no one is there to guide me home." They stood there, 2 small figures in a vast, dry riverbed, bound by the confessions they had just made. He was no longer a stranger, and she was no longer just a victim. Eliza realized she was not cold, not as cold as she had been. She was not shaking. And for the first time in her life, perhaps, she felt safe. It was a bizarre, unsettling feeling. This man was a Navajo, a man her people looked down on, a man from the wild places. Yet he had not touched her. He had not presumed. He had kept his distance. He had slowed his pace. He had listened. He had treated her with a respect her own father had forgotten. This feeling of safety was so new. It confused her more than the fear had. He seemed to shake himself, breaking the spell. He reached into a small leather pouch tied to his belt. "You are on a new path," he said, his voice practical again. "It is easy to get lost, not just in the desert, here." He touched his own chest. He pulled out a thin, leather cord. It was old, but strong. On it were 2 small beads, polished by long contact with skin. One was a single, hard kernel of blue-gray corn. The other was a small, irregular nugget of bright blue turquoise. He held it out to her, not as a gift, not as a payment, but as a tool. "The people say the corn is our mother. It feeds us. The stone is the sky, where the holy ones live. It helps you remember the way back to yourself, when the world tries to make you into something else." Eliza looked at the small, simple charm. Remember the way back to yourself, after a night when she had been turned into property, a thing to be traded. The words were a balm. She reached out. Her fingers, dirty and cold, brushed his palm as she took the cord. His skin was warm, dry, and calloused. The brief touch was a jolt, a spark of simple, human contact that felt more real than anything in the saloon. She slipped the cord over her head. The leather was warm from his body. The beads settled against her skin. A small, solid weight beneath her nightdress, a secret anchor. She looked up to thank him, but he was not looking at her. He had frozen. His head was cocked, his body absolutely still. He held one hand up, a clear signal for silence. Eliza strained her ears. At first, she heard nothing but the ringing in her own head and the faint, cold sigh of the night breeze. Then she heard it, far back, down the arroyo, the sound of a horseshoe striking a rock, a muffled curse, the jingle of a bridle, horses, more than one, and they were moving faster than a walk. Bragg. Eliza breathed, the name tasting like ash. He sowed bad seeds tonight, Ashkey said, his voice a low growl. Now the wind is blowing. He did not like being made a fool. He sent his men, not for the horse, for you. Always heart seized. They were on foot. The men were on horses. Ashkey grabbed her hand. This time, it was not a question. It was not a choice. It was a command. His grip was hard as iron, pulling her from her stillness. Run. He did not run back toward the town. He scrambled up the rocky bank of the arroyo, pulling her with him. She slipped, the rocks tearing at her bare feet. But his grip was relentless. He hauled her up onto the flat, open desert. This way, he hissed, pulling her toward a dark line of mesas in the distance. They ran. The ground was uneven, dotted with cactus and sharp-edged yucca. Eliza had never run like this. He was faster, much faster, but he did not let go of her hand. He half-dragged, half-carried her, his strength astonishing. The sounds of the horses were closer now. A shout carried on the wind. There they are by the black rock. A gunshot cracked, the sound flat and dead in the open air. The bullet whined past, nowhere close, but it was a promise. The wind, which had been a cold whisper, was changing. It began to moan, a low, rising sound. The stars, which had been so clear, began to blur. Ashkey lifted his head, not looking back, but smelling the air. A small, tight smile touched his lips. Good, he said, his voice breathless. Good, Eliza panted, her side a stitch of pure fire. They are shooting at us. The wind is our friend, he yelled over the rising shriek. And then it hit them. It was not a storm. It was a wall. A solid moving wall of sand and dust that rose from the ground to the sky. One moment they were running under a hazy moon. The next, the world was gone. The air was black, thick, and choking. The wind screamed, a physical force that tore at her hair and clothes and tried to rip her from his grasp. Eliza screamed, but the sound was stolen from her mouth. She could not see. She could not breathe. Ashkey did not slow. He pulled her forward, his head down. He seemed to be counting his steps. Then he veered hard to the left, pulling her off her feet. She fell against a solid wall of rock. He was shouting something in her ear, his voice muffled by the storm. The cleft. Here he shoved her, hard, into a narrow crack in the sandstone. It was a shallow cave, barely a split in the rock. She fell to her knees on the sandy floor, and he crowded in behind her, his body filling the entrance. He became a human door, his back to the storm, his arms braced against the rock on either side. Eliza was on the ground, huddled in the darkness, her face pressed into her arms, coughing up dust. Ashkey stood over her, a solid, warm shield. Outside, the world was ending. The wind shrieked like a dying animal. They could hear small rocks and debris smashing against the cliff face. They heard the frantic, terrified neighing of horses, and the dim shouts of Bragg's men, swept away, lost in the chaos. They were pressed together in a space no bigger than a coffin. Eliza was shaking violently, from the cold, from the fear, from the sheer, destroying power of the storm. Ashkey, his back taking the brunt of the wind, did not move. He was as still as the rock itself. He breathed slowly, deeply, conserving his air. A calm, steady presence in the heart of the roaring blackness. The storm raged for what felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 20 minutes, and as quickly as it had come, it began to die. The screaming wind dropped to a moan, then a whisper, then silence, a ringing, heavy silence. The air was still so thick with dust it was hard to breathe, but the world was still. Ashkey did not move for a full 5 minutes. He just listened. They are gone. he said at last. His voice was a low rasp. The storm sent them back to Bragg. They will not try again tonight. He stepped out of the cleft. Eliza, her limbs stiff and trembling, crawled out after him. She stood up, her body aching, and looked at a new world. The moon was pale, a white smear in a sky still thick with brown haze. The ground was smooth, every track, every plant, every rock covered in a fine, soft blanket of new sand. It was beautiful and terrible. Ashki was not looking at the sky. He was kneeling, a few yards from their hiding place. He was looking at the ground. "What is it?" Eliza asked, her voice raw. "Did they come back?" He did not answer. He pointed. She moved closer. In a place near the cliff, a small overhang had protected a patch of ground from the new layer of sand, but there were tracks in the old, hard-packed dirt, boot prints. They were not the scuffed, panicked tracks of Bragg's men. They were clear, neat, and purposeful, the prints of one man, walking, and they were fresh. They had been made during the storm. Someone had passed within 20 feet of their hiding place, moving through the storm as if it were a mild spring breeze. "Who is that?" Eliza whispered, a new, cold fear creeping up her spine. Ashki touched the edge of one print with his finger. He noted the worn left heel, the way the toe dug in, the long, confident stride. "Someone who knows this land as well as I do," he said, standing up. He looked out into the hazy darkness, not back toward Dry Creek, but ahead, toward the border. Red Jack. He looked at her, his face grim in the pale moonlight. The night was far from over. "We must keep moving. He is not looking for us. Not yet, but he is here." They did not sleep. Rest was impossible. Ashki kept watch, his back against the rock, his gaze sweeping the pale, sand-covered landscape. He had given Eliza his blanket, a thick, woven wool that smelled faintly of smoke and pine. She sat wrapped in it, her back against the other side of the rock cleft, the turquoise and corn amulet warm against her skin. She was exhausted. Her feet were raw, but her mind was wide awake. The night had been a lifetime. She had been sold, spat at, rescued, hunted, and hidden by a man from a world she did not know. And now, a ghost named Red Jack was walking in the same darkness. When the first hint of gray light touched the eastern sky, Ashki stood up. He moved stiffly. He had shielded her from the wind, and the cold had settled into his bones. "We go," he said. His voice was low. "We cannot go back to the town, and we cannot stay here. He is moving north. We will move east." He, Red Jack. He is a man who sees opportunities. Bragg's herd is an opportunity. The storm was a cover. He moves with purpose. Ashki looked at her, his face unreadable in the half-light. "My horse is gone. We walk." Eliza just nodded. She pushed herself to her feet. The blanket clutched around her. She was stiff and sore. She thought of her goats, Mercy and the others, and wondered if her father had even noticed she was gone. The thought came with a sharp, familiar pain, but it felt distant now. Ashki looked at her bare, torn feet. He frowned, then unslung the small pack he carried. He took out his bag of flour, his coffee, and the bundle of skins he had failed to sell. He rearranged them, then pulled a pair of moccasins from the bottom of the bag. They were worn, the soles smoothed by miles, but the deer hide was soft and thick. He did not hand them to her. He knelt, took one of her feet in his hand, and gently brushed the dirt and dried blood away. His touch was impersonal, like a doctor or a man tending a hurt animal. Eliza was so startled she did not pull away. No one had touched her with such gentle care in years. "You cannot walk like this," he said, a statement of fact. He slipped the moccasin over her foot. It was too big, but it was a heaven of softness. He did the same for the other, then used a strip of rawhide to tie them securely around her ankles. He stood up. "They will hold." He led the way, and she followed. The sun climbed, and the day became a long, hot, silent ordeal. The moccasins saved her. They moved east, into a landscape of broken rock and towering saguaro cactus, which stood like silent, multi-armed guardians. Ashki set a pace that was slow but relentless. He did not speak. He just moved, his eyes constantly scanning the ground, the rocks, the sky. By late afternoon, Eliza thought she could not take another step. They had not eaten. They had shared the last of his water from a small skin. And then he stopped. They were in a small, hidden canyon. She had seen nothing but rock, but he turned into a crack in the wall, and the world opened up. It was a small, high-walled basin, no bigger than a churchyard. A small, seep spring trickled from the rock, gathering in a stone basin before vanishing back into the sand. A single, ancient cottonwood tree grew by the spring, its leaves a shocking, vibrant green. Under the tree was a hogan, a traditional, 8-sided house of mud and logs. A thin curl of smoke rose from the hole in its roof. A small flock of sheep, with thick, dun-colored wool, rested in the shade of an overhang. Ashki paused at the edge of the clearing. He did not approach the home. He stood still, waiting. Eliza waited behind him, her heart thumping. This was his world. The blanket flap of the hogan was pushed aside. An old woman stepped out. She was small, her face a beautiful, intricate map of wrinkles. Her gray hair was pulled back in a traditional bun, tied with white wool. She wore a deep red velvet blouse and a long, dark skirt. Her hands were stained with herbs. This was Aunt Yazi. She was not a doctor, but a medicine woman, a healer. She looked at Ashki. Then her eyes moved to Eliza, taking in the faded nightdress, the 2 large moccasins, the pale, exhausted face. Ashki spoke. His voice was different. He spoke in the Dine language, a series of soft, flowing sounds that was like water over rocks. He spoke for a long time. The woman listened, her face showing nothing. When he was finished, she nodded. She turned her bright, black eyes to Eliza. "Yati," the old woman said. Her voice was like the rustle of dry leaves. "He says you are the woman who was traded for his horse. A poor trade. He lost a good horse." Eliza flushed, a hot wave of shame. The old woman's face cracked into a sudden, gap-toothed smile. "But a horse cannot learn to weave. You are welcome. Come in. You must enter. And sit. He will wait outside. He knows the rules." Ashki nodded, then moved to the spring. Leaving them, "The hogan is the world," Aunt Yazi said, holding the blanket for Eliza. "You enter from the east, where the sun rises. You move to the south. You sit on the south side. You do not cross the center, where the fire is. That is the heart. Do this." Eliza did as she was told, her head bowed. She entered the cool, smoky darkness. The space was simple. Woven blankets and sheepskins were piled against the walls. Bags of herbs hung from the ceiling. It smelled of sage and smoke and peace. She sat on a pile of skins on the south side, tucking her feet under her. Aunt Yazi gave her a bowl of water, then a bowl of thick mutton stew with corn. Eliza ate, the warm food a shock to her empty stomach. She ate slowly, remembering her manners. "You are the girl from the town," the old woman said, sitting opposite her, grinding herbs with a stone pestle, "the one with the drunk father." Eliza's shame returned. "Yes, it is a hard road, to have a weak man for a father." He was not always weak. No, the old woman agreed. They never are. This land. It finds the cracks in people. It splits them open. She looked at Eliza, her eyes sharp. "He says you want to be a teacher." Eliza looked up, surprised. "He told you that he said you value words." "Yes, I do. That is good. Words are medicine. But here, you must learn other things. You must learn to see. You must learn to be quiet. You must learn to be strong. Not just in your head, but in your feet. For 3 days. Eliza stayed with Aunt Yazi. Ashki came and went, disappearing for hours, scouting the ridges, his face grim. When he returned, he would speak in low tones with his aunt, and she would nod. The news they brought was bad. A man from a nearby sheep camp had come, desperate. Silas Bragg had kept his word. He had taken over the common well at Dry Creek, the one the small ranchers, the Mexican families, and the Dine used. He had posted armed guards, The price for water was no longer in cents. It was in loyalty. You signed a labor contract with Bragg, or your animals died of thirst. The town was suffocating. Aunt Yazzie began to teach Eliza. She did not teach her to read. She taught her to live. She showed her how to find water, how to tie the knots that hold a shelter together against the wind, how to grind corn. And Ashki taught her. He was a patient, silent teacher. He took her to the arroyo and showed her tracks. "This is a coyote," he said, pointing to a neat, small print. "He is efficient. He walks in a straight line. This is a white man's dog. He is stupid. He runs everywhere. He wastes his energy." He showed her the tiny, paired tracks of a desert mouse. He showed her the scuffed, heavy trail of Bragg's cattle, eating the land down to the rock. One afternoon, he was showing her how to use a dried stalk of sage. "You find a snake," he said. "You do not run. You do not scream. You are big. He is small. You are the storm. He is just a dry leaf. You take the sage. You brush it. The smell is strong. He does not like it. He will go." He demonstrated, sweeping the sagebrush gently along the ground. Eliza watched him. He was so careful, so connected to the earth. She took the sage and copied his motion. She was a good student. She was desperate to learn. She was tired of being a victim. "Good," he said. It was the first praise he had ever given her. "What about Red Jack?" she asked, her voice low. Ashki's face darkened. "He is gone. He took Bragg's horses. All of them. The ones Bragg was gathering for his big sale." "Good," Eliza said, with a sudden, sharp satisfaction. "He deserved it." "No," Ashki said, his voice flat. "It is not good. Bragg is a rich man. He will be angry. A snake is most dangerous when it is cornered. He was right. The proof came the next day, in the form of Tom, the blacksmith. He rode up to the hidden canyon on a mule, his face streaked with sweat and fear. He had followed directions from another dying shepherd. Seeking Ashki. They are blaming you, he said, sliding off the mule. He barely glanced at Eliza. He was talking to Ashki. Man to man, Bragg is saying it was a plot. He's telling everyone you and Red Jack are working together, that you staged the whole thing in the saloon, that the girl, he jerked his head at Eliza, was in on it. A distraction. So your redskin friends could steal his herd? Eliza's blood ran cold. That is a lie. Of course it is a lie, Tom snapped, but it is a smart one. It turns the whole town against you, and it gives Bragg an excuse for what Ashki asked. He has put a bounty on you, $200, dead or alive. And he has convinced the federal marshal to reissue the paper. He says you stole his property. He says the girl is a runaway indentured servant. He says she broke a legal contract. Eliza felt the world tilt. The contract, the one she had ripped to pieces. It did not matter. Bragg had the law on his side. He had Clayton Pike, who would stamp 100 new papers if Bragg asked him to. He is hunting you, Ashki, and he is hunting you, Missy. There is nowhere safe in the territory for either of you now. Tom drank a gallon of water from the spring, took a pouch of dried meat from Aunt Yazzie, and rode away, a man fleeing a coming fire. There was a long silence in the canyon. Eliza looked at Ashki. He had lost his horse. Now he had a price on his head. All because of her. "I have to go back," she said, her voice shaking. "I have to tell them the truth. This is my fight. It is not yours. You have a right to your own life." Ashki looked at her, and his gaze was steady. He did not believe in the white man's law. He did not believe in pieces of paper that said one person could own another. He believed in Hozo. He believed in balance. And what Bragg was doing was the deepest imbalance. It was a sickness. "You cannot go back," he said. "You are not the same woman who left. You have learned to see. Going back, that is being blind again." "But what can we do?" she cried. "He has the law. He has the guns. He has the water." Eliza sank onto a rock, her head in her hands. The hope she had been building for 3 days crumbled. She was still a prisoner. She felt a shadow fall over her. A woman, a young Mexican woman from the shacks on the edge of Dry Creek, was standing there. She held a small child, a boy of about 4, by the hand. She had seen Tom the blacksmith leave, and she had crept in, her face desperate. "Pardon," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. They say you are the teacher." She was looking at Eliza. Eliza looked up, confused. "What? My son," the woman said, pushing the small, shy boy forward. "He has no letters. I have no letters. I want him more." She held out a small, dried corn husk. "I will pay. I have one. Corn." Eliza stared at the woman, then at the child. This was what she had wanted. This was the dream she had confessed to Ashki in the arroyo. She looked at the ground, at the smooth, sandy dirt. She looked at the small boy's curious, dark eyes. She took a deep breath, and the fear began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. She knelt in the sand. She picked up a sharp stick. "This," Eliza said, her voice steady, "is a circle. It is like the sun. It is an O." She drew a large, clear O in the sand. The boy's face lit up. He snatched the stick from her and drew a wobbly, joyful circle next to hers. Eliza looked up. Ashki was watching them. The hard, grim lines of his face, the mask of the hunted scout, had softened. He was watching her, not as a victim, not as a white woman, but as a teacher. A small, slow, and truly rare smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was a flicker of light, a promise of balance. He knew then they were not running away. They were going to fight, not with Bragg's laws, but with their own. The small, wobbly circle in the sand was a beginning. Eliza taught the boy his name, Miguel, and then the letters for it. His mother watched, her dark eyes filled with a hope that was almost painful to see. The lesson lasted less than an hour, but when the woman and her child had crept away, the energy in the small canyon had changed. Eliza stood, brushing the sand from her dress. She was no longer wearing the faded nightgown. Aunt Yazi had given her a simple, dark wool skirt and a boy's linen shirt, traded from a passing wagon years ago. The clothes were practical, and in them, Eliza felt less like a victim. She felt solid. She looked at Ashki, who was watching her, his face thoughtful. "I have to go back," she said. It was not a question. He nodded slowly. "The bounty. No, not the bounty. The lie. Bragg is painting me as a thief. He is using that paper, the one I tore up, as a weapon. I will not let him. I will not be a ghost he chases. I will go to the sheriff's office and I will tell the truth. I will demand he tear up the new one. You believe the law will listen to you, to a poor woman, against Silas Bragg." His voice was not unkind, but it was heavy with a truth she did not want to hear. "I believe in the truth," she said, her chin high. "It is all I have." "The truth is a good shield," Ashki said, standing up. "But it is a poor sword. Bragg is not using the law. He is using the shadow of the law. We must fight him in the shadows. I will go to Tom, the blacksmith. He is a man who trusts his own eyes. He sees the imbalance. He may know what Bragg is planning. We need more than truth. We need proof. Then we go together." Eliza said. "No, it is too dangerous for you. It is more dangerous for me to hide," she said, and her gaze was as steady as his. "He is hunting me. I will not be the rabbit. I will be the stone in his path. I am going back to Dry Creek, with you or without you." Ashki looked at her for a long time. He saw the woman who had spat in Bragg's face. He saw the woman who had drawn a circle in the sand. "We go tonight," he said. They left Aunt Yazi's canyon under the cover of a moonless sky. The old woman had pressed a small bag of dried meat and parched corn into Eliza's hands. "Hos ho," she had whispered. "Walk in beauty. Do not let his ugliness become yours." The journey to Dry Creek was silent and tense. Ashki moved through the darkness not like a man, but like a part of the night itself. He led Eliza along game trails and shallow washes, and they entered the town from the east, a side that was mostly abandoned shacks and forgotten corrals. The town was asleep, but it felt like a different sleep. It was a town under a siege of fear. Ashki led her into the deep shadows of the alley between the livery and the mercantile, a place that smelled of hay and rust. "Wait here," he whispered. He placed his hand on her shoulder. A brief, solid pressure, and then he was gone. Eliza waited. She pressed herself against the rough, splintered wood of the livery, her heart a cold drum in her chest. She was back. She was back in the place of her humiliation. Every small sound, the creak of a cooling tin roof, the distant scuffle of a foraging animal made her jump. He was gone for 10 minutes. It felt like 10 years. When he reappeared, he did not emerge from the darkness. He was simply there beside her, as if the shadows had produced him. "Tom is with us," he said, his voice a low breath against her ear. "He hates Bragg. He says Nora, at the Dandelion, hates him more. She sees everything. She is the one who knows things." But he stopped. He had gone rigid. "What?" Eliza whispered. "Movement. Across the street. On the roof of the sheriff's office." Eliza strained her eyes but saw nothing but dark rectangles. "Clayton Pike." Ashki breathed. "He is not in his office. He is watching. He was waiting." A sudden beam of light, sharp and bright, lanced from a lantern, cutting across the alley, illuminating them in its yellow glare. "There they are." It was Pike's voice, high and triumphant. "By the livery, do not let them escape." A shot cracked, the bullet screaming off the metal hinge of the livery door, sending splinters into Eliza's cheek. Ashki did not hesitate. He grabbed her hand. "Run!" They ran. Not back the way they came, not into the open. Ashki pulled her deeper into the maze of alleys, past the backs of the stores, past piles of refuse and empty barrels. Behind them, they could hear men shouting, boots pounding on the hard-packed earth. "They are heading for the bluffs," another voice yelled. "Cut them off," Pike screamed. They burst from the alleys onto the far side of town. Before them lay a stretch of flat, open ground, and beyond that, the dark, scarred line of the bluffs. "Where are we going?" Eliza panted, her lungs on fire. "A place they will not look," Ashki said, pulling her. He did not let go of her hand. They ran. They were exposed, clear figures under the stars. Another shot rang out. This one was closer. Eliza felt a tug at her sleeve, a sudden, angry bee sting of a sound. Ashki did not falter. He pulled her toward a dark cleft in the rock face, a place she had only heard rumors about. The old salt caves, where the animals went to lick the mineral-caked walls. They scrambled inside, plunging from the starlight into a darkness so thick it was like being smothered. The darkness was absolute. It was not the living, breathing dark of the open desert night. It was a dead, heavy blackness. The air was cold, damp, and it smelled of minerals and ancient, still water. It was a tomb. Eliza stopped, her breath catching in a sob. She could hear the men outside, their voices frustrated, their lights playing over the rocks. Where did they go? They vanished. Like smoke. "Check the caves," Pike ordered. Eliza's body went cold. They were trapped. This was the saloon all over again. But worse, this was a grave. She began to shake. A deep, uncontrollable trembling that started in her knees and took over her whole body. This was the fear she had felt when Bragg had laid his hands on her. The feeling of being an animal in a snare. "I cannot," she whispered, her voice a thin, broken thread. "I cannot be in the dark. I cannot be trapped." Ashki was a shadow near the mouth of the cave, listening. He heard the men moving away, their frustration growing. "They will not come in," he said, his voice low. "They are afraid of this place. They say it is haunted." He turned from the entrance, a darker shape in the black. He heard her. He heard the sound under her words, the dry, terrified sobbing she was trying to control. He moved toward her, his steps silent on the cave's gritty floor. "I am here," he said. His voice was a low rumble, a solid, living thing in the dead air. "Please," she whispered. She did not even know what she was asking for. "Please, do not go far. It is so dark." He was close now. She could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He did not reach for her. He did not presume. "May I?" he asked. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "May I touch your hand?" The question stunned her. After a lifetime of men taking, of Bragg grabbing, of her father pushing her away. This man asked. Her breath hitched. Yes, she breathed. She reached out, her hand trembling so hard she could barely control it. She found his hand was rough, as she remembered, the palm and fingers calloused from a life of hard work, but it was incredibly warm. He did not just take her hand, he unfolded it. He held her small, frozen fingers in his strong grasp. Then, with his other hand, he gently, slowly covered her hand. He was not restraining her. He was anchoring her. He held her hand between both of his, and he began to rub. A slow, steady, grounding pressure. He was chafing her cold fingers, bringing life back to them, bringing her back to herself. She was still shaking. He was kneeling in front of her now, a solid presence in the dark. She could make out the line of his shoulders against the faint, pale light of the cave entrance. "You are cold," he said. It was not a question. He saw a damp strand of hair plastered to her cheek, a dark line in the faint light. She had been crying. He released one of her hands, but only to move his own. He paused, a breath of a moment. He was asking again, without words. She did not pull away. His fingers, the fingers of a warrior, touched her face. They were impossibly gentle. He brushed the damp hair back from her temple. His touch was so light, so careful. It was like being brushed by a feather. He was not touching her like a man touches a woman. He was touching her as if she were a piece of spun glass, something infinitely precious and easily broken. He was touching her as if she were gold. Eliza closed her eyes. A single tear, hot and fast, slid from under her lid. It was not a tear of fear. It was a tear of pure, aching release. The knot of shame and terror that had been lodged in her chest since the saloon, the feeling of being a piece of property, began to dissolve. She was still trembling. He leaned closer, and she felt the warmth of his breath. He rested his forehead against hers, skin to skin. It was not a kiss. It was something far more intimate. It was a sharing of strength, a profound and simple anchor of human warmth. "You are not an animal," he whispered, his voice resonating from his brow to hers, a vibration she felt in her bones. "You are not a trade. You are not his. You are a person. You are Eliza. You choose your own path." She took a deep, shuddering breath and let it out. He had done it. With those words, with that touch. He had undone Bragg's poison. He had given her back her name. She stopped shaking. They stayed like that for a long time, forehead to forehead, his hands warming hers, in the cold, dark, and haunted salt cave. When he finally moved, he drew back slowly, but he kept one of her hands in his. "We are safe for now," he said, "but we are not finished." "No," she said, and her voice was strong again. "We are not. We need that proof." They waited until the first gray hint of dawn. The men were long gone. They slipped from the cave, two shadows in the pre-dawn light. "Tom is not enough," Ashkai said. "We need Nora." The Dandelion Saloon was a different place in the morning. It smelled of stale beer and regret. Nora, the owner, was a woman with a face like a dried apple and eyes that had seen everything twice. She was sweeping the floor when they came in the back door. She did not look surprised. She just propped her broom against the wall. "You two are either very brave or very stupid," she said, her voice a dry rasp. "Clayton Pike was here not an hour ago, bragging about how he ran you out of town. We need your help." "Nora," Eliza said, stepping forward. "We need to prove Bragg is a liar. We need to stop him." Nora looked at Eliza. She looked at the hand-me-down clothes, the raw determination in her eyes. She looked at the silent Navajo warrior standing behind her, his hand near the knife on his belt. "Bragg is a snake," Nora said, "and I hate snakes, but he is a rich snake." "What proof do you think you'll find Tom said Bragg is smuggling?" Ashki said. Nora laughed, a harsh, bark-like sound. "Smuggling. Of course he is. Everyone knows that, but he is smart. He moves horses, but he is not selling horses. He is smuggling rifles, hiding them in false-bottomed wagons, moving them to the border. He has a big shipment going out in 2 nights. This was it. This was the proof. But," Nora said, lowering her voice, That is not the worst of it. Bragg has a new partner. She reached under the bar and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. One of Bragg's men dropped this last night, drunk. I think he was meant to burn it. Eliza took the paper. It was a message, written in a crude, bold hand. The horses are a good distraction, but the herd needs water. My price for the rifles is high, but my price for your well water is higher. I will meet you at the Coyote Pass. 2 nights. Bring the money, and do not be late. It was signed with a single, brutal letter, R. Red Jack, Ushkey said, his voice a flat, deadly monotone. Eliza stared at the paper. It was not a rivalry. It was an alliance. Bragg, the man of law, and Red Jack, the outlaw, were partners. Bragg had not been robbed. He had arranged it. He is poisoning the whole valley, Eliza whispered. Worse, dear, Nora said, taking the paper back and tucking it in her dress. He is selling the poison. Now, get out of my saloon. You have what you need. The question is, what in God's name are you going to do about it? The air in the back room of the Dandelion Saloon was thick with stale smoke and the smell of impending violence. Nora spread the crumpled note from Red Jack on the table. The single letter, R, looking like a jagged scar. Coyote Pass, Ushkey said, his finger tracing the map in his mind. It is a bottleneck, narrow, high walls, a good place for an ambush, a good place for a trade, and a good place to trap a snake. Tom the blacksmith said. He had joined them, his face grim, his massive hands clenched. Or 2 snakes. In this case, they meet in 2 nights, Eliza said, her mind racing. Bragg brings the rifles and the money. Red Jack brings, what, just his word he brings his guns, Nora said flatly. And he holds the stolen herd as collateral. It is a partnership of thieves. They will not trust each other for a second. The plan must be simple, Ushkey said, his eyes fixed on the dirty table. We cannot fight them both. We are 3. They will have 20 men. 4, Eliza said. Ushkey, Tom, and Nora all looked at her. I am not hiding. I am not waiting. I am the reason you are in this. Ushkey, I will be the one to see it end. Ushkey looked at her, and this time he did not argue. He saw the woman from the salt cave. He nodded. 4. Then what is the plan? Tom asked, his voice a low rumble. We cannot fight them. We do not fight them, Ushkey said. We expose them, we light a fire, and we let the snakes eat each other. We need a witness. We need the whole town to see. The town will not be a Coyote Pass, Nora said, crossing her arms. No, Eliza said, her voice quiet, a sudden clarity hardening her resolve. But the town will be in Dry Creek. We cannot stop the trade, but we can stop the escape. Ushkey looked at her, a new respect in his eyes. He understood. The plan formed between them, piece by piece, a desperate, intricate machine. Tom, Ushkey said, the road. Bragg's wagons must pass the lower ford to get to the pass. Can you stop them? Not for long, just delay them. Tom permitted himself a grim smile. The axle on that lead wagon of his, he said, it has a weakness, a man who knows where to strike. He could make that axle fail. And I have some caltrops for horses. He will be stuck. Nora, Eliza, Ushkey continued, you will be my eyes. When they are stuck, the meeting will be in chaos. Bragg will be angry. Red Jack will be nervous. They will meet in the pass, on foot. I need a signal. I need to know when Red Jack's men are visible. A signal, Eliza asked. A lantern. 3 flashes. From the ridge north of the pass. You will be high enough to see both sides. When you see Red Jack's men, you signal me. And what will you be doing? Nora asked, her eyes narrowing. I will be where they cannot see me, on the high cliffs, above the wagons. When they are all arguing, I will go down. I need one of those rifles. 1 rifle, Tom asked, confused. 1 rifle, with the army markings, Eliza said, understanding him completely. Proof. Something we can show the town. It is too dangerous, Nora said. It is all we have, Ushkey replied. I will get the rifle. I will meet you at the South Ridge. Then we ride. We bring the proof back to Dry Creek. Ride what Eliza asked. We have no horses, Tom, Ushkey said. The blacksmith nodded. My mule. And Nora keeps 2 horses in her stable for emergencies. They are fast. They will be waiting for you at the South Ridge, tethered and ready. The plan was insane. It relied on timing, on shadows, and on the predictable treachery of evil men. 2 nights later, the air at Coyote Pass was electric. The canyon was a narrow slot in the earth, the rock walls rising 300 feet on either side. The moon was a thin, useless sliver, leaving the canyon floor in deep shadow. Tom had done his work. Bragg's lead wagon, a heavy freight hauler, was canted at a disastrous angle. Its front axle snapped. It blocked the narrow pass completely. Silas Bragg was in a fury. He paced in the lantern light, his face a dark purple. "You incompetent fools," he roared at his wagon driver. "We are an hour late. Red Jack will think this is a trap. I do not know what happened." "Boss," the driver stammered, It just broke. And 2 of the horses went lame. Found these." He held up 2 wicked, 4-spiked iron caltrops. Bragg stared at them. Sabotage. He spun around, his hand on his pistol. "Who from the darkness up the canyon?" A voice called out, heavy with mockery. "Having wagon trouble, Mr. Bragg Red Jack." He was on foot, flanked by 6 of his men, their rifles glinting in the faint starlight. "You are late," Red Jack said, his voice a gravelly rasp. He was a big man, bigger even than Bragg, with a thick, matted red beard. "My wagon broke." Bragg snapped. "It was not my fault. It was a setup. Someone knew we were coming. Or maybe you are trying to cheat me," Red Jack said, stepping closer. "Where is the money? Where are the rifles?" Bragg countered. "I do not see them. They are in the wagons. You fool!" Bragg spat. "Right where I said they would be. Now, the money. High above them, on the North Ridge." Eliza and Nora lay flat on the cold rock. They had been in position for 2 hours. Eliza's hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was a cold, sharp anticipation. "He is here," Eliza whispered, her eyes straining in the dark. She could see the shapes of Red Jack's men spread out, taking cover. Now Nora asked. She held a lantern with a thick blanket wrapped around it. "Not yet," Eliza whispered. "Ashki said to wait. Wait until they are all committed." Down in the canyon, Bragg and Red Jack were arguing, their voices echoing off the walls. "I will see the rifles first," Red Jack insisted. "Fine," Bragg yelled. "Pike, get a crate. Show the man his toys." Eliza's heart stopped. Clayton Pike. She scanned the shadows near the wagons, and there he was, wearing his deputy badge, looking pale and terrified, but holding a rifle. He was not just Bragg's tool. He was a part of the crime. "Clayton is here," she breathed to Nora. "He is with them. That changes things," Nora said, her voice grim. "The law is not just blind. It is corrupt." Pike and another man fumbled with the canvas on the back of the second wagon. "Now," Nora said, "they are distracted." Eliza held her breath. She took the small, wooden whistle Ashki had given her. It was carved like a hawk. Nora unwrapped the blanket from the lantern. She opened the shutter. A bright beam of yellow light. She closed it, opened it, closed it, opened it, closed it. 3 flashes, a signal, sent into the vast darkness. High on the cliffs directly above the wagons, a shadow detached itself from the rock. Ashki had been waiting, clinging to the cliff face, for an hour. He had seen the signal. He began his descent, moving like a spider, silent and sure-footed, using a thin rope woven from horsehair. Down below, Pike had opened a long, wooden crate. Red Jack stepped forward, picked up one of the rifles, and examined it, his eyes gleaming. "Beautiful," he said. "Army issue, 1984 trapdoors. They are all there," Bragg said impatiently. 50 of them. Now, the money." Red Jack smiled. A truly ugly sight. The money. Of course. He reached into his coat. At that exact moment, a sharp, clear whistle, like the cry of a hawk, echoed through the canyon. It was not Eliza's signal. It was a different call. Red Jack's head snapped up. His smile widened. "It seems," he said, his voice dropping, "that my other partners have arrived. Gunfire erupted, not from Red Jack's men, from the ridges. From both sides of the canyon, men were shouting, not in English. "What is this?" Bragg roared, pulling his gun. "This," Red Jack said, "is a double cross. You stupid, arrogant bastard." He pulled his hand from his coat, not with a bag of money, but with a pistol, and shot Clayton Pike in the shoulder. Pike screamed and went down. Clutching his arm, Bragg's men, caught in a crossfire, began shooting wildly. The canyon floor became a hell of noise, and smoke, and ricocheting lead. "It is a trap," one of Bragg's men screamed, before being cut down. Ashki, halfway down his rope, froze. This was not the plan. The plan was broken. Red Jack was not just double-crossing Bragg. He had brought a third party, a band of Mexican revolutionaries he was also supplying. He was playing both sides. "Get the rifles," Red Jack roared. His men, who had been hiding, swarmed the wagons. They were not fighting. They were stealing, grabbing the crates, while Bragg's men were cut to pieces by the snipers on the ridge. Bragg understood. He had been played. Completely. He was not a partner. He was the supplier. And the target. "You—" He screamed at Red Jack, his face contorted with pure hatred. He raised his pistol to fire, but Red Jack was already gone, running back up the canyon with his men, leaving Bragg to be slaughtered. Ashki knew he had only seconds. The chaos was his cover. He dropped the last 20 feet, landing silently on the canvas roof of the third wagon. He rolled off, onto the ground, and grabbed the rifle Pike had dropped. It was real. It was marked. It was the proof. A stray bullet tore a groove in the wagon wheel next to his head. He did not flinch. On the ridge, Eliza watched in horror. "It is all wrong," she cried. "They are killing them. We have to go," Nora said, grabbing her arm. "This is not our fight anymore. We have to warn the town." Eliza saw Tom, the blacksmith. He had been hidden near the broken wagon, waiting for the signal to retreat. He was trying to crawl away when one of Red Jack's men, a straggler, saw him. The man raised his rifle. "No!" Eliza screamed. The shot echoed. Tom cried out, a short, sharp sound, and grabbed his hand. "He is hit," Eliza said. She was not a girl hiding. She was a woman with a purpose. "We have to get him." They scrambled down the rocky slope, Nora cursing, Eliza moving with a desperate, focused speed. They found Tom, his face pale, blood pouring from his left hand. The bullet had taken 2 of his fingers. "It is bad. Nora," he gasped, his voice tight with pain. "It is just a hand, you big fool," Nora said, her own voice shaking. Eliza was already tearing a strip of cloth from her petticoat. She wrapped it tightly around his hand, pulling it hard, her hands sure and steady. "You are a good girl. Eliza," Tom breathed, his eyes closing for a second. "We have to move," Nora said. "Now, before they come down to loot the bodies." They half dragged, half carried the massive blacksmith toward the south ridge. Down in the canyon, Ashki was moving. He had the rifle, but he saw Bragg. The rancher was not fighting. He was running. He had scrambled onto one of the horses cut loose from the wagon, and he was galloping, not after Red Jack, but back toward Dry Creek. "The ledger," Ashki said, his voice a low growl. The proof. Nora had said Bragg kept a ledger of all his crimes. He was going back to destroy it. He saw Eliza, Nora, and Tom silhouetted on the ridge, struggling to get to the horses. He could not go to them. And then he saw Red Jack. The outlaw leader was standing on a high rock, watching the chaos, a bag of money, Bragg's money, in his hand. Ashki had to make a choice. The rifle was not enough. Not if Bragg destroyed the ledger. He needed the ledger, or he needed a witness who could never be argued with. He looked at Bragg, disappearing in the dust toward town. He looked at Red Jack, a clear target on the high rock. He split the plan. He could not do both. He turned, not toward Eliza, but up the canyon, scaling the rocks, his movements fast and angry. He would not hunt Bragg. The rancher was a coward. He would run to his hole. Eliza could handle the fire. Ashki would hunt the wolf. He would bring Red Jack back. He would make him talk. On the ridge, Eliza looked back. The canyon was a smoking ruin. She saw Ashki, a lone figure, running up the canyon, Away from her, away from safety, hunting the man who had caused all this. And she saw the dust cloud on the road to Dry Creek. Bragg. Nora, she said, her voice hard as the rock under her feet. He is going back. He is going to burn the evidence. They reached the horses. Tom was slumped over, but conscious. You take Tom, Eliza said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Ride to Aunt Yazzie. She will know what to do for his hand. It is the only safe place. And you, Nora asked, her hand on the saddle. I am going back to town, Eliza said. She pulled herself onto the second horse, a fast-looking bay mare. I am not letting him win. It is a warehouse. Eliza, Nora said, her voice sharp with a new fear. The old assay office? That is where he keeps his papers. It is a tinderbox. He will not just burn the books. He will burn the building to the ground. Eliza thought of the fire, the heat, the suffocation. A deep, primal fear made her want to turn, to ride with Nora, to be safe. She looked back at the empty canyon where Ashki was hunting. He is doing his part, she said, her voice shaking, but not with fear, with anger. I will do mine. She kicked the horse, hard, and galloped down the dark trail, toward Dry Creek, toward the man who had tried to buy her, and toward the fire. Ashki did not follow. To follow was to be led. He was a hunter, and the hunter moves to where the prey will be. He had seen Red Jack's men, the Mexican fighters, melt back into the high rocks. They were not Red Jack's men. They were partners, and the partnership was over. Red Jack was now just a man with a bag of money, a man who had made too many enemies in one night, and he would run. Ashki left the chaos of the canyon, scaling the eastern wall. He moved with a speed that was almost inhuman, his moccasins finding holds in the rock that an ordinary man would never see. He ran along the high, dark ridge, his lungs burning, the stolen rifle in his hand. He was not chasing Red Jack. He was racing him. He knew this land. He knew the arroyos, the game trails, the hidden springs. He knew that 2 miles north, this high plateau broke apart into a series of deep, intersecting canyons, and he knew that one of those canyons, a place the Dine called Tsebiku, the sinking wash, was a dead end. It was the only place a man could hide a string of horses, and it was the only way Red Jack could escape. Red Jack ran, his heavy boots clumsy on the rock. He had the money, and he had his life. He had outsmarted Bragg. He had outsmarted his revolutionary partners, leaving them to fight each other. He was a man who believed only in himself. He scrambled down a steep shale slide, heading for the wash where his 2 best horses were tethered. He reached the bottom, the bag of money heavy in his hand, and he laughed, a short, barking sound. He had won. A shadow detached itself from the wall of the canyon. You won nothing, Ashki said. Red Jack spun around, his hand grabbing for his pistol. He was fast, but Ashki did not move. He stood 10 yards away, the stolen trapdoor rifle held loosely at his side. He was not aiming it. The scout! Red Jack sneered, his eyes glittering in the dark. He did not fire. He was a predator, and he recognized another. You are a long way from home, and a long way from your dead friend. Ashki's face was stone. He did not react. He just waited. Oh, I remember you, Red Jack said, savoring the moment. He was a man who loved this part. The fear, Hastian, that was his name. Was it not the army scout who thought he was a tracker? He died hard. Scout, he screamed. He screamed your name. I think, just before I put the last bullet in him. Ashki's grip tightened on the rifle. The memory was a hot knife in his chest. The smell of pine, the sound of the shot, the long carry home. He saw the flicker in Red Jack's eyes. The man wanted this. He wanted Ashki to break, to charge, to make it a brawl. But Ashki was not a man of simple revenge. He lived by Hosho. Killing this man here, in the dark, was not balance. It was not justice. It was just an ending. He needed more. He needed a beginning. You will not kill me, Scout Red Jack mocked, his hand still on his gun. You do not have the stomach for it. No, Ashki said, his voice flat. You are a witness. A dead man cannot talk. Red Jack laughed. A witness to what? To Silas Bragg. The outlaw's amusement died. Bragg is a dead man. No, he is a coward. He ran. He is in Dry Creek. He is burning the proof. But you are the proof. Red Jack fired. The flash lit the canyon. The sound, a deafening crack. But Ashki was not there. He had moved the instant Red Jack's muscles tensed. The bullet tore a chunk of rock from the wall where he had been standing. Ashki did not use the rifle. He used the earth. He used the shadows. Red Jack fired again, wildly, into the darkness. Ashki circled him, silent. Red Jack was a wolf, but he was a wolf in a cage. Ashki was the cage. When Ashki struck, he came from the side, a blur of motion. He did not hit Red Jack. He hit the gun, his foot connecting with the outlaw's wrist, sending the pistol flying. Red Jack roared, a sound of pure animal rage, and charged. He was bigger, heavier. He swung a massive fist that would have broken Ashki's skull. Ashki ducked under the blow, stepped inside the man's guard, and drove his shoulder into Red Jack's stomach. The air left the big man in a gasp. Ashki used the man's own momentum to spin him, tripping him over a low boulder. Red Jack fell, hard, his head striking the rock. He was stunned, but not out. Before he could recover, Ashki was on him. Ashki did not use a knife. He did not use a gun. He used the rope from his belt. It was a short, brutal, and silent fight. Red Jack was strong, but Ashki was fueled by a cold, precise anger. In less than a minute, Red Jack was bound, his hands and feet tied. He lay on the ground, breathing heavily, his eyes full of a new, different kind of fear. The fear of a man who was no longer in control. You will walk, Ashki said. He picked up the rifle. He picked up the heavy bag of money. And you will tell them the truth. Eliza rode the bay mare into the ground. She did not spare the horse. She galloped through the night, the wind tearing at her, her mind fixed on one thing: the fire. She reached the edge of Dry Creek. The town was dark, silent, and then she saw it. A flicker of orange, coming from the old assay office. The building Bragg used as a warehouse. The town was asleep. Bragg was counting on that. Eliza did not ride to the fire. She rode to the church. The small, wooden building stood at the end of the main street, its bell tower a dark finger against the sky. She leapt from the horse, ran inside, and grabbed the thick, dusty rope. With all her weight, she pulled. The sound that ripped through the night was a violation. It was a scream of iron, clang, clang, clang. It was not a call to prayer. It was an alarm. Lights appeared in windows. Doors were thrown open. Men, half-dressed and confused, spilled into the street. What is it, fire? Eliza screamed from the church doorway, her voice raw. The assay office, Bragg's warehouse, it is burning. She ran from the church, leaving the bell to swing, its voice dying in moans. She ran toward the fire. The whole town was following her. The assay office was truly blazing now. Yellow flames licked from the windows. The front door was open, and in the square of light, she saw Silas Bragg. He was throwing papers from a desk onto a pile, sloshing kerosene from a can. He was destroying everything. He is burning the proof, a man yelled. The crowd, now a mix of ranchers, saloon men, and frightened women, stopped, held back by the heat. Eliza did not stop. She was running directly at the building. Eliza, she heard her name, a voice she had not heard speak with clarity in 6 years. Josiah Hart was standing at the front of the crowd. The bell had woken him. He was not drunk. He was terrified. He was watching his daughter, the girl he had sold, run into a burning building. The shock of it, the pure, awful reality, hit him like a physical blow. He was sober, perhaps for the first time in years. Eliza, know the smoke, he cried. She was at the door, the heat searing her face. Father, she screamed, stopping for a half-second. Josiah fumbled, his hands shaking. He was wearing his heavy, wool traveling cloak, the one he wore even in summer. He ripped it from his own shoulders and threw it at her. Your cloak. For the smoke, Eliza caught it. She wrapped the thick wool around her head and face, and she plunged into the inferno. The smoke was black, oily, and instant. She could not breathe. She was blind. She fell to her knees, where the air was clearer. The fire was a roaring, living thing. She crawled. She knew what she was looking for. Nora had told her. The black ledger. She saw the desk. Flames were already eating one side of it. Papers were burning, curling into black ash. She saw a large, leather-bound book. She lunged for it, grabbing it with her cloaked hands. It was hot. It seared the wool, tucked inside its cover. She saw a folded piece of paper. The new contract. The one that called her a thief. She pulled the ledger free, clutching it to her chest. The roof above her groaned, a sound of surrender. A burning beam crashed to the floor, cutting off her escape. She screamed, backing away, and found a wall, the window. She used the heavy ledger to smash the glass. She gulped in the blessedly cold night air, and she heard the crowd gasp. She crawled out, cutting her hands on the glass, and fell onto the dusty street, coughing, her hair singed, her face black with soot. But she held the book. Silas Bragg stood by the door, his face a mask of pure, demonic rage. She had done it. She had beaten him. He raised his pistol. "You interfering bitch," he roared. "You have ruined everything," he aimed. The crowd screamed. Clayton Pike, who had ridden back with Bragg, was slumped against the wall of the saloon. His shoulder was a mess of blood. He had been shot by Red Jack. He had been betrayed. He saw Bragg aim the gun at the girl his boss had tormented. "Boss," he whispered, his voice weak. "No, do not." But Bragg's finger was tightening. A bottle exploded at Bragg's feet, shattering on the boardwalk, spraying him with glass. Not tonight. Silas Nora. She had followed Eliza. She sat on her horse at the end of the street, another bottle in her hand. Bragg flinched, his shot going wild, the bullet plowing into the dirt. The distraction was all Eliza needed. She stood up, her small frame shaking, but her voice was clear. She lowered the cloak. Her face was a warrior's mask of soot and sweat. She held the ledger high. "I am not property," she shouted, her voice ringing across the square. The crowd was silent. The standoff was absolute. Bragg, his gun still raised, Eliza holding the proof. And into this tableau, a new sound, a man's heavy, dragging steps. Ashki knees emerged from the darkness. He was dragging a bound, exhausted Red Jack. He threw the outlaw leader into the center of the square. Red Jack fell in a heap, glaring at Bragg with pure hatred. The crowd gasped. "This is Bragg's partner," Ashki said, his voice cold and clear. He held up the stolen army rifle. "This is his rifle, the one he sold to this man, the ones Red Jack used to kill his men tonight." "It is a lie," Bragg shouted, his voice high and cracking. Red Jack laughed from the ground, a dry, awful sound. "He is a fool," the outlaw rasped. "He paid me to steal his horses. He was selling guns to me. And to the Mexicans, he tried to play us all. He is the biggest liar in the territory." The truth, raw and brutal, hung in the air. The crowd turned on Bragg. They were no longer a crowd. They were a mob. Bragg looked at their faces. He saw no mercy. He was ruined. He was a dead man. He did the last, most cowardly thing. He lunged, not for his horse, but for the wounded, staggering Clayton Pike. He grabbed his deputy, pulling him in front of his body like a shield, and pressed the hot barrel of his gun to Pike's head. "Get back!" Bragg screamed, his eyes rolling. "All of you, I will kill him. I will kill us both." The crowd froze. Clayton Pike looked at the man whose boots he had licked, the man who had used him and betrayed him, and who was now using him as a human shield. He was in agony from his shoulder, but the pain in his pride was worse. He had been a fool. He stopped struggling. He let his body go limp, a dead weight in Bragg's arm. And with his good left hand, he slowly, deliberately, let his own pistol drop from his fingers. It fell to the dust with a soft, final thud. He had surrendered. A perfect, terrible silence fell over the square. Bragg held the broken deputy. Ashki held the rifle. Eliza held the ledger. The fire roared, unchecked, and then a drop of water hit Eliza's face. She looked up. Another. A sudden, cold wind swept the square, and with it came the rain. Not a gentle sprinkle, but a deluge. The first rain in 4 months. It came down in solid, driving sheets, hissing on the flames of the burning warehouse, turning the thick dust of the street to instant mud. It washed the soot from Eliza's face. It streamed down Ashke's stoic features. It dripped from the brim of Bragg's hat. The fire was dying, the smoke turning to steam. The drought was over. The fever had broken. The rain fell. It was a solid, silver curtain, and it washed the world clean. It drummed on the tin roofs, turned the street to a thick, running river of mud, and hissed on the dying embers of the assay office. The fire was a smoking, blackened skeleton. Silas Bragg stood frozen, the gun still pressed to Clayton Pike's head. The rain plastered his fine coat to his body, and his hat dripped a steady stream onto his shoulders. He was a man holding a hostage in a world that had just been completely altered. The power, the heat, the drought, his weapons were all gone. There was only the water, and the mud, and the circle of wet, silent faces watching him. Clayton Pike, his body limp, was shivering, from blood loss or cold, or perhaps just a terrible, final clarity. He was looking at Eliza. It was the preacher, Reverend Michael, who moved first. He was a thin man who usually spoke of brimstone, but tonight his face was just tired and sad. He stepped from the shelter of the mercantile porch into the driving rain. He did not walk toward Bragg. He walked to the center of the square, his boots sinking into the mud, and he turned to the crowd. "This is a night of judgment," he said, his voice not loud, but it carried in the wet, clean air. "It is a judgment that has been long delayed." Nora was there, standing by the horse that had carried her, her face a grim mask. Aunt Yazzie had arrived, a silent, powerful presence who had come in on Tom's mule, having seen the fire from the hills. She stood near the edge of the circle, her old eyes missing nothing. The Mexican woman Eliza had taught, Maria, was there, holding her small son's hand. The ranchers who had been choked by Bragg's prices, the storekeep, the men from the saloon, they all stood in the rain. They did not go home. This was their town. This was their court. "We have seen the evidence," the preacher said, his hand gesturing not to a book, but to the smoking ruins, to the bound man on the ground, to the girl holding the ledger. Eliza stepped forward, her dress and hair soaked, the soot on her face running in dark rivers. She opened the black ledger. The rain spattered on the pages, but the ink, dark and permanent, held. "He has it all written," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Not just the rifles, not just the stolen horses." She turned a page. "He has the names, every man he forced into debt, every labor contract." She found the folded, newer paper, the one that called her a thief, and she held it up. "And this, the lie he told to hunt us." She looked across the mud at her father. Josiah Hart was standing alone, his thrown cloak a sodden heap at his feet. He was weeping, silent, shuddering tears that were lost in the rain. "And this," Eliza said, her voice dropping, "a contract, to trade me for a horse." She let the paper fall into the mud. Red Jack, trussed and soaked, began to laugh, a wet, coughing sound. "He is a fool, all of you," the outlaw spat. "He writes it all down," I told him. "A fire is the only good ink, but he loves his numbers." "You admit it." Then the preacher asked, his gaze settling on the outlaw. "You were in league with him. I was in league with his money." Red Jack sneered. "He paid me to steal his own horses, to make a scare, so the army would come, and he could sell them as beef. He paid me in rifles, which I sold to the men who were shooting at him tonight. He is the biggest fool in Arizona territory, and now he is your fool." The confession was total. It was brutal. It was the last nail. Silas Bragg let out a sound. It was not a word. It was a high, animal sound of air being forced from his lungs. His arm, the one holding the gun, began to shake. He was not a tyrant. He was not a mastermind. He was just a hollow man, and the rain had washed all the paint away. He was finished. He let go of Clayton Pike. The deputy fell in a heap at his feet, landing in the mud, and he did not move, except to cough. Bragg stood alone, his gun hand dropping to his side. He had no more cards to play. "What is to be done with him?" the storekeep asked, his voice shaking. "There is no law here. The law was him." "We are the law," Nora said, her voice like iron. "We are the ones who live here. We are the ones who have to drink the water. The water." Maria, the Mexican woman, said, her voice small but fierce. "The water is from God. It is not his." "She is right," the preacher said. He looked at Bragg, who seemed to have shrunk, his expensive suit now just wet, muddy cloth. "Silas Bragg, by the witness of this town, you are found to be a man of deceit, a purveyor of violence, and a thief of the public trust." There was no jail in Dry Creek that could hold him. There was no federal marshal for 100 miles. There was only the community. "The well," Tom the blacksmith said, his voice low and pained. He had come back with Nora, his hand a massive, bloody bundle of rags. "The well is not his. It belongs to the town. It belongs to all of us." A murmur of assent ran through the crowd. "You will sign the paper," the preacher said, his voice hard, giving the well and the land around it to the township of Dry Creek. "You will pay from your accounts in Prescott, restitution to the families you have harmed. And the labor contracts," Eliza said, holding up the ledger. "They are void. All of them. All of them." The preacher agreed. "What about him?" a rancher asked, pointing at Red Jack. Ashkey, who had been silent, stepped forward. "He is not of this place. His crimes are for the territory. He is for the federal marshal. We will hold him, but we will not kill him. We are not him." The decision was made. There was a sense of balance. Bragg would be ruined, but he would live. He would be a prisoner of his own reputation, a man with no power, no water, and no name. Red Jack would face the Army's justice. The town would have its water, and Clayton Pike. He stirred in the mud, trying to sit up, his face a pale oval of shame. I was, he began. "You were a fool." "Clayton," Nora said, not unkindly. "And you were a coward, but you are not a killer." She looked at the badge, pinned to his soaked shirt. "But you are not the law. Not anymore." Pike looked down. His good hand, his left hand, fumbled with the pin. He tore the badge from his shirt and threw it. It landed with a small, wet sound in the mud. Near the contract Eliza had dropped. It was over. The crowd was beginning to break up, the tension gone, replaced by a deep, communal exhaustion. Men moved to secure Bragg, to drag Red Jack to the holding cell, to help Clayton Pike. Josiah Hart had not moved. He was still standing alone, his face working. He looked at his daughter, his Eliza, who had just faced down a fire and a gun, who had saved a town, who he had sold. He took a step, and another, his boots heavy in the mud. He stopped in front of her. I am, he started, his voice a wreck. He could not say the words. "I know," Eliza said. She was not angry. She was not sad. She was just finished. The old life was burned away, like the assay office. "I threw the cloak," he whispered, as if it were a defense. "I saw you, the fire, and I remembered. I remembered your mother. I remembered what I was. And what are you now?" "Father," she asked, her voice not cruel, but genuinely curious. He had no answer. He just looked at his hands, empty and shaking. "I have nothing left to sell," he said. A confession of his own total bankruptcy. "Not even you." "No," Eliza said. "You do not." She did not forgive him. It was not that simple. But she saw him, a weak man, broken by a land that demanded strength. He turned and walked away, not toward their shack, but into the rain, a man with no destination. The square was almost empty now. The rain was softening, turning to a steady, hopeful drum. The smell of wet dust, of hose-ho, filled the air. The preacher, Tom, and Nora approached Eliza and Ashkey, who stood together by the ruins, "The town owes you both," the preacher said. "We are in your debt." "There is no debt," Ashki said. "There is just balance." "Well," Nora said, a small, tired smile touching her lips. "The balance is this. We need a teacher, that classroom you wanted. Eliza, the church is empty all week. The children are waiting." Eliza looked at her, stunned. Her dream, the one she had whispered in the arroyo? "And you," Tom said, looking at Ashki. His bandaged hand was a stark, white club. "We need a scout, not for the army, for us, to watch the water, to know the land, to be our eyes. The town will pay. Fairly." Ashki looked at the blacksmith. He looked at the smoking ruins of Bragg's office. He looked at the clean, dark land. He nodded. "Once." The three of them left, moving off into the rain, leaving Ashki and Eliza alone in the middle of the muddy square. The night's work was done. The town was saved. They had been offered their new lives, but they had not spoken a word to each other. Ashki looked at her. Her face was clean now, washed by the rain. Her hair was a dark, sodden mess. Her hands were cut and raw from the window glass. She was shaking, the reaction setting in, a fine tremor in her hands. He did not reach for her. He just held out his hand, palm up, a simple offer. Eliza looked at his hand, the hand that had warmed hers in the salt cave, the hand that had been so gentle. She put her hand in his. His grip was warm and solid. They stood like that for a long time, hand in hand, in the middle of their town, as the rain washed the world new. She did not feel like a rescued woman. She did not feel like she belonged to him because he had saved her. He had not bought her with his horse. He had not won her in a fight. He had stood beside her. He had given her a choice, and she had taken it. She had faced the fire, and he had faced the wolf. And now, they were here, together. She squeezed his hand. This was not a debt. It was not a contract. It was, she realized, a choice. And it was a choice she had not yet made. She wanted to, but she wanted to choose it in the light, as a free woman, not as a girl saved in the dark. She wanted to choose him, not because she needed him, but because she wanted him. The thought was as new and as clean as the rain. The rain that had broken the drought had also broken the fever. Dry Creek, for the first time in a year, did not smell of dust and despair. It smelled of wet earth, of sage, and of clean, washed air. The sound of the town changed. It was no longer the sharp, brittle sound of tempers on edge. It was the sound of hammers repairing roofs, the cheerful slop of mud, and the steady, rhythmic creak of the windlass at the common well. The well was the new heart of the town. The fence had been torn down for firewood. The preacher had, in an act of practical faith, declared it the Lord's water, and therefore, everyone's. A roster was drawn up, not by law, but by agreement, ensuring every family, every herd, and every passing traveler got their fair share. The spirit of freedom, which had been a dry, choked thing, was beginning to grow again, watered by the simple, shared act of pulling a bucket from the earth. In the Dandelion Saloon, 2 weeks after the fire, Tom the blacksmith sat at a table, his left hand resting on the wood. It was heavily bandaged, a thick, white club. Aunt Yazi, with her ancient, practical knowledge, had saved the hand, though the 2 fingers were gone forever. He was learning to drink his beer with his right hand, and he was clumsy. Nora, the saloon owner, came over, wiping her own hands on her apron. She set a fresh bottle of whiskey on the table. "This one is on the house." "Tom," she said, her voice a dry rasp. "What for?" Tom asked, eyeing the bottle. "For being a fool who got himself shot, no," Nora said, a rare, thin smile touching her lips. "It is to replace the one I wasted on Bragg's feet." She tapped his bandaged hand. "You will learn to swing a hammer with that, or you will learn to swing it with the other. A man is more than 2 fingers." "Aye," Tom said, looking at his hand, and then at her. "He is—" He poured himself a drink, right-handed. It was a new start. Eliza's new start was under the battered tin awning of the old church. The rain had cleared, and the days were bright and clear, the air blessedly cool. Her classroom had no walls. Her desk was an overturned barrel, and her blackboard was a single, massive piece of slate, warped and cracked, that had been salvaged from the floor of the burned-out assay office. It was a permanent, black reminder of the fire, but she had turned it into a tool of hope. Her students were a strange and wonderful collection. Maria's son, Miguel, was her first and most dedicated pupil. He was joined by 2 shy dine girls, whose father was a shepherd for Ashki's family, 3 white children, whose settler parents had previously thought Eliza was just that drunk's daughter, also came, their faces scrubbed, their eyes wide with curiosity. Eliza stood before them, a piece of white chalk in her hand. She had traded her best wool skirt, the one Aunt Yazi had given her, for a box of chalk from the mercantile. "Today," she said, her voice clear and steady, "we are going to learn a new word. We are going to learn the word water." She drew the letters, large and clear, on the black, warped stone, W-A-T-E-R. The children copied her, their sticks scratching in the damp. Clean sand. It was a beginning. She saw her own father, sometimes, from a distance. Josiah Hart had not left town. He had, instead, done the most shocking thing of all. He had gone to the Mexican families, the ones living in the shacks by the arroyo, and asked for work. He was not a man who knew how to work the land. He was a man of books and wagons. But he was working. Eliza saw him one afternoon, digging irrigation ditches for a small corn patch, his back bent, his fine, poetic hands blistered and caked with mud. He was working alongside Maria's husband. He was not drinking. He did not come to her. He did not ask for forgiveness. He was, in his own broken way, doing penance. He was earning his bread with the sweat of his brow, a man who had finally hit a bottom so hard it had bounced him back into the world of the living. Eliza watched him, and she felt a small, quiet, and very complicated kernel of peace. He was on his own path, and she was on hers. Her path, she was learning, was still tied to Ashki's. He was the town's new scout. He was paid in flour and salt and hard coin, to range the territory, to watch for strangers, and to make sure the water was safe. He was gone for days at a time, and when he was, Eliza felt a strange, new kind of emptiness. When he returned from a 3-day patrol, he did not go to the saloon for a report. He came to her, to the small, one-room adobe shack the town had given her as the new schoolteacher. He stood in the doorway, a tall, silent presence, his gaze taking in the small room. The children were gone for the day. "You are well," he said. It was a statement. "I am," she said. "And you, what did you see?" "I saw new grass." He said, "The land is healing. The deer are coming down from the high rocks." He paused. "My aunt, Aunt Yazi, she asks for you." Eliza's heart gave a small, strange leap. "For me, is she well? She is always well. She is Aunt Yazi." He seemed, for a moment, unsure. It was a new look for him. "She is holding a ceremony, a small one, a nightway. It is for healing, for those who have been touched by chaos, by fire, by ghosts." Eliza knew he was not talking about Bragg. He was talking about the fire she had run into, the terror of the saloon, the invisible wounds. She invites you to sit, to be, sung for. It was an honor so profound, Eliza was speechless. It was a bridge. "When tonight, if you will come." She walked with him, as she had that first night. But this time, she was not in a thin nightdress. She was in her own clothes. She was not barefoot. She wore the moccasins he had given her. And she was not being rescued. She was being invited. She brought a gift. She had spent all morning making small, sweet corn cakes, baked with honey she had traded for. The ceremony was not what she expected. It was not frightening. It was gentle. It was held in the open air, by the spring, under the stars. It was just Aunt Yazi, and Ashki, and an old uncle of his who sang. his voice like the wind. They did not ask her to speak. They did not ask her to pray. They simply asked her to sit. Aunt Yazzie sat before her, her eyes closed, and she sang. She sang of the holy people. She sang of the coming of the corn. She sang of the water. And as she sang, she used a soft eagle feather to brush the air around Eliza. She brushed her head, her shoulders, her hands, and her feet. She was, Eliza understood, brushing away the fear, brushing away the smoke, brushing away the memory of Bragg's hand. She was brushing away the girl who had been for sale. And she was welcoming the woman who was a teacher. When it was over, Eliza felt lighter. She felt scoured, in a good way, cleaned, from the inside out. She offered her corn cakes. Aunt Yazzie took one, tasted it, and her wrinkled face broke into a smile. "Good," she said. "You have put the sun in it." Before they left, the old woman went into her hogan. She came back with a blanket. It was not large, but it was beautiful, woven in a complex, geometric pattern of red, black, and white. "This is for you," Aunt Yazzie said, pressing it into Eliza's hands. "The pattern. It is called the way back. It is to remind you that no matter where you walk, you always know the path. You will not be lost again." Eliza held the blanket. It was a gift of profound, symbolic meaning. She had given them corn. They had given her a path. They walked back in silence. The blanket folded over Eliza's arm. The moon was high and full, flooding the desert with a clean, silver light. They did not go to her shack. Ashki, with a simple touch on her elbow, guided her up a small path, a game trail that led to the top of the low mesa that overlooked the sleeping town. They stood on the flat rock. The entire peaceful valley spread out below them. The air was cool and smelled of the sage Aunt Yazzie had burned. They stood, side by side, for a long time. The silence was not empty. It was full. It was full of everything that had happened, and everything that had not yet been said. Eliza was the one to break it. "Why?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Why did you do it that night, in the saloon? That was your horse. He had saved your life. You did not know me." Ashki looked out at the valley. He was quiet for so long. She thought he would not answer. "I did not know you," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But I knew him. I knew Bragg." "I saw the imbalance. It was a sickness. It was a wrong thing, a person being treated as a thing. I could not let it be." He turned to her, his face serious in the moonlight. "It was not for you. Not then. It was for Ho, for balance." "I understand," she said. "No," he said, and he took a step closer. She could feel the warmth of him. "You do not all of it." He looked at her, and his eyes, which she had once thought were like a hawk's, were just a man's. A man who was, she realized, just as nervous as she was. It was for balance. At first, he said, "But then, I walked with you. I saw you in the storm. I saw you in the salt cave. I saw you draw a circle in the sand. I saw you walk into the fire." He reached out, his hand open, not to take, to offer, as he had in the town square. She put her hand in his. It was familiar. It was right. "Eliza," he said, and her name on his lips was a new sound. "I did not buy you. The horse was not for you. The horse was to break the paper. That is all." He held her hand, and his gaze was so steady, so honest, it made her heart ache. "I choose you," he said, his voice simple and profound. "I did not buy you. I choose you, and I am hoping you will choose me." Eliza's breath caught. This was it, the choice, the one she had wanted, the one she had been waiting for. She was not a girl being rescued. She was a woman being asked. She had been so afraid of being beholden, of being owned, that she had not let herself see this. This was not ownership. This was not a contract. This was a partnership. She looked at this man, the man who had been gentle in the dark, the man who had respected her, the man who had seen her, the real her, under the soot and the fear. "You are," she said, her voice a whisper, "a very, very slow man. Ashki knees. A small, startled smile touched his lips. I am a careful man. Yes, she said, you are. She brought her other hand up to rest on his. I am tired of being rescued. Ashki, I am tired of being saved. I am not saving you. Eliza, I am just standing here. I know. She squeezed his hand. I choose you. Yes. He did not rush. He did not grab her. He watched her face, his eyes asking a new question. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to turn away, to say no. She did not turn away. She met him halfway. His lips touched hers. It was not a kiss of fire or passion or desperation. It was a kiss that was like the rain. It was clean. It was gentle. It was profoundly respectful. It was a promise of balance. It was the first real and truly consensual touch of her entire life. It was a beginning, chosen in the moonlight, on a high rock, by two people who had earned their peace. The fall came, and it was a season of firsts. It was the first time in memory that the air was cool by September. The first time the arroyo held a steady, shallow stream of water. And the first time the town of Dry Creek felt less like a trap and more like a home. With the new water and the new leadership, the town had begun to build. The first thing they built was a small, solid cabin on the edge of the newly flowing creek. Tom, his left hand now a scarred, two-fingered hammer grip, had led the construction. Ashki had helped, his hands, which knew the land, now learning the shape of cut timber. It was a small house. It was not a shack. It was a home, built of solid pine and sealed with daubed mud. It had one room, a strong roof, and a single, large window that faced east, to greet the rising sun. It was Eliza's home, and it was Ashki's home, inside. The scent of fresh-cut pine was mixed with the smell of sage. The blanket Aunt Yazi had given Eliza, the way-back pattern, was spread over their bed, and hanging on a wooden peg by the door was a single, dark, and beautifully braided rope of horsehair. It was the bridle from the war pony Ashki had traded. It was not a reminder of what he had lost. It was a reminder of what he had chosen. The school flourished. The town council, with Nora acting as the treasurer, had voted to use the money seized from Bragg's accounts to build a proper schoolhouse. It was just one room, built from salvaged, fire-darkened wood and new lumber. But it was solid, and it was full. Eliza stood at the front, the large, warped piece of slate from the assay office now her permanent blackboard. She was no longer a girl teaching in the sand. She was the schoolmistress. Miguel, Maria's son, was her fastest learner. The Dine Shepherd girls were shy, but their eyes missed nothing, and their handwriting was precise and beautiful. Even the children of the white settlers, the ones who had once looked at Eliza with pity, now vied for her attention. "This is a letter," she said, her voice full of a new, quiet authority. She drew a large W on the board with her chalk. "It is the beginning of the word water. It is the beginning of the word world." The children copied her, their chalk squeaking, their faces tight with concentration. In the afternoons, the lessons changed. Ashki, his work as the town scout done for the day, would often be waiting, leaning against the doorframe. He would take the children to the creek bed, the mud now dry enough to hold a perfect print. "This," he would say, pointing to a small, neat track, "is the coyote. He is a teacher. He wastes nothing. He does not fight the storm. He waits for it to pass." Eliza would watch from the doorway. She was teaching them the white man's letters. He was teaching them the language of the earth. Together, they were giving the children a full and balanced world. The past was not forgotten. It was simply put in its place. One afternoon, as Eliza was sweeping the schoolhouse, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Josiah. He was thinner, and he was clean. His hands were calloused and brown from the sun. He had been working for Maria's husband, digging ditches and tending corn, for 3 months, and for 3 months. He had been sober. He did not enter the schoolhouse. He stood on the threshold. "Eliza," he said. His voice was rough. "Father," she replied. She stopped sweeping. "I am leaving," he said. I am not a man for this land. I am not strong enough for it." He looked down at his hands. "But I am a man. Still, I have a job. With the railroad, far south of here. Laying track." "That is good," Eliza said, and she meant it. "It is honest work. I wanted—" He fumbled, reaching into his pocket. "I wanted to give you this." He pulled out a small, oilskin-wrapped package. He held it out. Eliza unwrapped it. It was a knife. A small, fine-bladed skinning knife, with a handle of worn deer hide. It was her mother's. Her mother had used it to cut herbs and wild vegetables. "I kept it," Josiah whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "It was the only thing I never sold. She would have been so proud of you. Of the fire. You got the fire from her." Eliza looked at the knife, the last tangible piece of the woman she barely remembered. She looked at her father, this broken man who was finally, slowly, trying to put himself back together. She stepped forward. She did not hug him. It was not that simple. But she put her hand on his arm. "Thank you, Father," she said. "This is a good gift. I will write." He said. "I hope you do," she said. "But I have a boundary. Father, I will read your letters, but I will not read them if they smell of whiskey." He flinched, but he nodded. "Fair," he said. "That is fair." He turned and walked away. He did not look back. Eliza watched him go, a man finally walking a straight line, even if it was a line that led away from her. She closed her hand around the knife. She had forgiven him, not for him, but for her. She had let the anchor go. Their own joining had been as simple and as solid as their new home. There was no white dress. There was no church. They had walked, one evening at twilight, to the high mesa that overlooked the town. Aunt Yazzie had met them there. So had Tom and Nora. The preacher came, but he came as a friend, not as an officiant. Eliza wore her simple wool skirt. Ashki wore his usual dark shirt and pants. Aunt Yazzie did not speak English. She simply took the way-back blanket from her shoulder and wrapped it around both of them, binding them together. She lit a small bundle of sage, and the clean, sharp smoke washed over them. They spoke their vows to each other. "Not to a god. You are the man who saw me," Eliza said, her voice shaking, but strong. "When I was invisible, I was lost, and you stood by me. I choose to walk this path with you. You are the woman who walked into the fire," Ashki said, his voice a low rumble. "You are the one who makes a circle in the sand. My life was a straight line, and you have made it a circle. I choose you. Eliza, I will always choose you." They had sealed it not with a ring, but with a clasp of hands, under the blanket, in the smoke of the sage. The town, too, had made a new commitment. The court in the mud had become a true town council. They met once a month in the Dandelion Saloon, which was now a place for meetings as much as it was for whiskey. The first rule, passed unanimously, was that the well was a common trust. The second, proposed by Nora, was that no contract of labor could ever be signed in exchange for a debt of vice. Dry Creek, the town, had put a formal end to the practice of buying people. Silas Bragg was a rumor, a ghost. His land had been seized by the territory and broken up. He was gone, ruined and disgraced. Red Jack was in a federal prison in Yuma, a story to frighten children with. The future was their own. At the last meeting, Eliza had stood up. "I cannot teach all the children," she said. "They are coming from the ranches now. I need help. I have written a letter to the guild in Prescott. I am asking for another teacher. We must pay her a fair wage." The council, led by Nora, had agreed. Then Ashki stood. "The town is safe," he said. "The patrols are working, but the trail is hard. Wagons are coming again, now that the water is free. But they are weak when they arrive. We should build a way station, a safe place, to rest, to trade. We will protect the trail, and the trail will feed the town." The council had agreed to that, too. They were not just a town, they were a community. It was morning. The light, as it always did, came first through the east-facing window. It was a bar of pure, liquid gold, painting the rough wooden floor. Eliza was awake, braiding her hair, the light catching the simple gold band on her finger, a ring Tom had forged for her, a wedding gift. Ashki was at the door, pulling on his boots. He was leading a patrol today. He stood and watched her, the teacher, his wife. She finished her braid and turned, and she smiled at him. He walked over to her. He did not say anything. He simply reached out, his calloused, brown hand covering hers. He lifted her hand, and he touched his fingers to her palm, her wrist, the back of her hand. It was the same touch from the salt cave. It was not the touch of a man who owned a thing. It was the touch of a man who was marveling at a thing he had chosen. His fingers were gentle, his gaze steady. He was touching her, not as if she were a fragile piece of glass, but as if she were what he had said she was, as if she were gold. He leaned in and kissed her, a simple, warm, and familiar kiss of morning. "Be safe," she whispered. "I will see the tracks before they are made," he replied. He left, and she watched him go. An hour later, her own lessons were done for the morning. She met him at the edge of town, where he had her mare, the fast bay, waiting. He had finished his patrol of the town perimeter, and now they had an hour. They mounted. They did not speak of where they were going. They simply rode, together. They walked the horses down to the arroyo, the water splashing at their hooves. The sun was warm on their shoulders. The desert was vast, and the sky was a hard, brilliant blue. The west was still a harsh and unforgiving place. It was a land of rock and thistle, of sudden storms and long droughts. But it was not a prison. They rode out, toward the high, clean mesa. The freedom they had found was not a thing to be bought, or sold, or even won. It was a road they had chosen to walk, a path where no one was pulled, and no one was left behind. They rode, side by side, into the open, sun-washed land. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below to let us know where you are in the world and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales. Like this video, and give us some extra support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.